7th, 2022. Notice has been given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building and sending a copy to the Montclair Times, Star Ledger, and Herald News. This is a public hearing in which any members of the public are welcome to attend. The meeting agenda is available on the Montclair website, as is a link to the township's YouTube channel, where the hearing can be viewed live or after the fact. The hearing is also being televised on Channel 34. Before I call roll, there's one application under Old Business, application 2022-18 for 504 Bloomfield Avenue. That is going to be adjourned to the July 14th meeting of the HPC. And now I will call roll. Mr. Heineman?
Present.
Mr. Reimnitz?
Here.
Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Sweeney?
Here.
Mr. Graham?
Here.
Ms. Bennett is excused. Mr. Connolly?
Here.
Mr. Burr is not here, but he informed me that he might be a little late to tonight's meeting. So.
Okay. All right. Before we get into the approval of minutes, Tommy, can you just give me an update on the 504 Bloomfield Ave application that's being carried? Did the applicant say if he's going to submit that information about cleaning?
Yes, the applicant is looking into cleaning the facade. I think he's going to have somebody come and clean the facade and see if that works, and then get back to us at the next meeting.
Great. And just remind some of the commissioners who were not present at the last meeting, if it comes back, if you see it on the agenda for the next meeting, just make sure you watch the video of that portion so that you're eligible to vote.
Mr. Reimnitz watched and sent me the form. I sent it to Ms. Bennett to do the same. I hadn't sent it to her originally because I thought it was going to be on tonight's agenda, but I sent it to her this evening.
Is the applicant going to use the process that Tom suggested in the materials, or?
He didn't specify in his email who he hired, I guess, to do it.
Okay. Very good. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the minutes of the June 9, 2020 meeting. Did everyone who was present have an opportunity to review the draft minutes that were circulated? Yes. Any amendments or revisions? Okay.
I have a minor change.
Okay.
I did abstain because a client of mine owns the building, not a colleague.
Very good.
May
Tommy,
not
if you
be significant, but that should be in there.
just note that minor amendment.
Okay.
So just change colleague to client.
Colleague
for,
to client. Okay.
The abstention.
Client.
Right.
Okay. Got
Can
it.
I have a motion to approve as amended?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
One abstention. Very good. Okay, moving on to new business. I'm sorry, no. Public comment. Now's the opportunity for members of the public to provide any comments to this commission that are not related to anything on the agenda. If you have any comments, please approach the podium. Seeing none, I'll move to close that portion. If it's not on the agenda, you can speak on anything at this time. If it is an item on the agenda, you can ask whatever questions, comments, statements in support or opposition at that time. So this is just general public comments. Seeing none, I'll close that portion. Committee reports, I don't think that we've done much since the last meeting, since this is a special meeting, so I'll go ahead and close that portion. We've addressed old business, so we'll move on to new business. This is application 2022-10, 95 Maple Avenue, Northern Property Associates LLC. This is a application for a total demolition permit.
We have all the stuff we submitted electronically. If you need to pull anything up on the projector. Thanks.
Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself and your client.
Vice Chair, nice to see you again.
Yes.
Forum. Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Alan Tremulak. I'm appearing on behalf of the applicant.
appearing on behalf of the applicant, Northern Property Associates, LLC. Just some brief opening remarks. First, I want to thank the board, the commission. I'm going to use the word board all night, I'm sure, since I'm used to planning board and zoning board. But thank the commission for scheduling this meeting. We had some difficulties with scheduling, and my client's anxious to have this application determined. And we appreciate the board's courtesy and cooperation in finding a meeting, to hear this application, special meeting, I should say. So this is an application for a total demolition permit pursuant to Montclair Code Section 347-142.1 to demolish a two-story residential structure located at 95 Maple Street, Block 4106, Lot 11 on the tax map. Excuse me. The property is located in the Wheeler Street Historic District, which, as you know, is noted in the master plan as a potential historic resource, and as such, the demolition or anti-demolition ordinance is applicable to this property. And that's what brings us here tonight. Now, as I think some of you, at least I'm going to guess 3 of the 5 people here tonight, will recall, in 2019, this property was evaluated as part of the survey performed by Mr. Connolly's office as part of the evaluation of the Wheeler Street Historic District, which was being considered for nomination as a designated historic district under the Township Historic Preservation Ordinance. The property report prepared for this property by Mr. Connolly concluded, and we think very properly so, that the building at 95 Maple Street was non-contributing, meaning the structure had no significant historic or architectural value and therefore did not contribute to the character of the proposed Walnut Street Historic District. And again, as several of you will recall, who were on the commission at that time in 2019, there was considerable opposition from the community to the proposed designation. And as a result, after hearings were concluded, the commission decided to withdraw the proposed nomination and not designate the neighborhood, the Wheeler Street neighborhood, as an historic district. I just point out what I think is a significant legal question, as in light of what I just stated, which is whether the ordinance should even apply to this building, which, number one, is non-contributing. Number two, is located in a potential historic district or potential historic resource, which was previously considered by this board relatively recently and rejected for nomination as an historic district. So I'm not even sure the ordinance should apply to this, but I just point that out because we're prepared to proceed with the application because we believe clearly on its merits that this property is appropriate for issuance of a total demolition permit for the reasons that we hope to set forth this evening. So I have 2 witnesses I intend to present. My first witness, who's sitting to my right, is my client, Jack Gambino, who's the principal of the applicant, Northern Property Associates, LLC. He will testify regarding this property, the reasons he purchased the property, what he intends to do with the property, and also the knowledge that he has regarding this building, since, as you'll hear from him, he has owned the property directly adjacent for approximately 30 years. My second witness is Gregory Dietrich, who is a historic preservation consultant. He's already provided a report to the board. He'll testify regarding his conclusions and opinions stated in his report, which basically deal with his response to Mr. Connolly's report, as well as his review and evaluation of the criteria for issuance of a demolition permit set forth in the ordinance. So, if I may, I would ask for Mr. Gambino to be sworn.
Sure. Just before I swear him in, I just want to let the record reflect that Mr. Burr is here. He arrived just prior to Mr. Tremblak's opening statements. And with respect to the procedural question on whether or not this commission has jurisdiction, it's my understanding, and Mr. Burr, correct me if I'm wrong, that we do have jurisdiction because the ordinance is triggered anytime there is a property that's individually surveyed and listed in the master plan. So that's my understanding, is that?
That's correct.
Okay. So procedurally, I think we can hear this and then we'll decide on the
Yeah,
merits.
I wasn't
Yep.
objecting to going forward. I just wanted to just note that. I think it's an issue. But again, I'm not expecting this commission to weigh in on that or for Mr. Burr to render an opinion without any prior notice from me. Okay.
With that being said, Mr. Gambino, can you raise your right hand? Sure. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony before this commission will be truthful and accurate to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, duly sworn. You can proceed, Mr. Tremblak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jack, what is your relationship to the applicant, Northern Property Associates?
I am the operating manager.
Okay, you the principal owner of that?
Principal
business?
owner, yes.
Okay. And is the LLC the owner of the property at 95 Maple Street?
Yes, it is.
And when did your LLC acquire title to that property?
August of 2020.
Okay. Now, do you own property at 99 Maple Street, which is directly adjacent to this property to the south?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And how long have you owned 99 Maple Street?
Since 92.
1992?
1992, sorry.
And what is the current use of that property?
The current use of the property is I also own a company called Montclair Supply Corp. We're a plumbing and heating supply that we've been there operating in that building. And there's 2 residential units above that.
Okay. And have you operated your business at at that location, 99 Maple Street,
I've been
continuously?
Yes, I've been the owner and operating a business there since 1992.
Okay. And were you aware of the proposed nomination of the Wheeler Street Historic District, which was considered by this commission in 2019?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what you were aware of and whether you participated in that process?
I was made aware through notification from the township and the council, and my wife and I, my wife is Rose Gambino here, we attended both meetings and both hearings during that time. And we were also here when the township decided to, I guess, back down from their claim.
When you say the township, you mean this
The
commission?
council, yes, the commission.
Okay. All right, and then it was sometime after.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, yeah, sure, sure.
Because I don't know if anybody's familiar with Maple Avenue and my 99 Maple Avenue building that's there. That building was included at that time. And I've always maintained that building, and if everybody's seen that building, I've always through the years kept up with it and kept it looking pretty much the same as it originally was, meant to be. So I just
Okay.
want to make that point.
Okay, and so you said earlier that you purchased the property at 95 Maple Avenue in September of 2020?
August 2020.
August, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, and that would have been some 8 or 9 months after this commission finished hearing the Wheeler Street
Mhm.
matter. Okay. What was your purpose, or what was the reason for which you purchased this property at 95 Maple?
I purchased this property for the sole purpose of expanding parking. Because I've been down in that area since '92, myself, my neighbors, other business owners, we all realize that it's a kind of a very packed area during the day for operating business and operating even the people who live in that neighborhood. So I assumed by eliminating this home, which I know the history of this home, that giving some more parking for my business and my employees would alleviate a lot of a lot of crowding in the street, a lot of traffic by taking those vehicles off the road. And that was my biggest purpose of it.
Did you also purchase at or around the same time the adjacent property on the other side at
Yes, I did.
91 Maple?
Yes, I did. I purchased that in June
Okay.
of
and-
2020.
And that's the property that, as I understand it, for many years had a tire repair?
Yes, everybody would know that as Brantley's Tire Shop. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Brantley.
So what was your overall plan, I don't want you to go into great detail, for the two properties at 91 and 95 Maple Avenue?
Well, as the business owner of the plumbing supply, I've had the good fortune of having the trust of a lot of the local contractors in the town. I've had a trust of a lot of the residents of the town. It's become a spot for them to purchase their plumbing and heating supplies, to gain knowledge of how to do a lot of things. So we've had an expansion. Unfortunately, I can't stretch the building that I'm in. So that building next door, the old Brantley building, came available. The owner approached me, and I thought at that time, I said, great. The only problem was there was no way to get to the rear of that property because 95 took up the property that the house sat on and also the driveway right up against the building. So there was no way to get to the back of that. So I still purchased the property thinking, okay, well, we'll see what happens, you know what I mean? Well, shortly after that, now mind you, the home 95 already had caught on fire. It had a fire, burned the back half of the building down. The house was empty. Mr. Chin was my neighbor of 95 Maple Avenue. He passed away during COVID, and he left the home to his son. I knew his son for years since he's a little kid. He wasn't one that was going to rebuild anything. He approached me and said, I don't want this no more. So we sat down, we made a deal, and at that point, I thought I gained parking to be able to get access to the back. I got parking spaces, and that's really where I was heading. We are looking to expand my plumbing and heating supply. I was looking, the 91 Maple Avenue, the Brantley Tire Shop, it has a small warehouse in the rear. And I wanted to make the front area a little bit of a display, you know, a little office and display to have some showroom items for the plumbing and heating supply.
And
That
use the
would've-
balance of it for storage?
And use the balance of it for storage, yes.
Okay. And then also provide parking, as you've indicated?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Were you, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the existing structure. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you, were you aware at the time you purchased these properties that you would need a total demolition permit from this commission in order to demolish 95?
I honestly, I found out kind of after the fact. So I was aware after I purchased the property that I would have to come in front of the board for that. But honestly, I've been in the contracting business most of my life. I am a master plumber to the state of New Jersey. I'm a master HVACR contractor. I'm a home improvement contractor, licensed in the state of New Jersey. So I knew this home was a trap because unfortunately, and God rest his soul, I know Mr. Chin, and he did all the work in this house himself. And if you walk into this home and look at the work that was done, I am surprised this house hasn't burned to the ground 20 years ago. But there's been enough fires due to poor work that was done in the house. And the house has, through the years, had all types of additions and patches put onto this home. If you were to come into this home, you would see where the kitchen and bathroom lie within the structure. And you would all shake your heads and say, I can't believe that this was done legally, because structure-wise, location, size, I don't know how it existed. I truly don't.
What about the exterior of the building?
The
What do you
exterior,
know about that?
what I know about the exterior is this, is when I hired a demolition contractor to come in and give me a price, and then I took the road of approaching the board. because of COVID, during that time, there was just so many delays. I mean, the nightmares that I went through were incredible. I mean, from the utilities, losing paperwork, to, I just went on and on and on. What happened was, I'm sorry, I lost my spot for a second here. I'm talking. You asked me
No,
a question?
that's okay. I was asking you about the exterior.
Oh, the exterior, so that's what it was. So while we were there, I noticed that there was asbestos under the vinyl siding of the house. So we had to have an asbestos contractor come in and remove all the siding that was on the house that pertained to asbestos. And we had to have the house all, certified that there was no longer asbestos on there. The interior of that house had been gutted already by the previous owner. Because of the fire that was there. He had started working through that. They also had asbestos problems throughout that house. And they had ServPro, I believe, come in, and they gutted, that house is 3/4 gutted on the interior, and all the asbestos was removed from the interior and the exterior of the house. There are 4 layers of siding on that house. There was the original, not the original, I should say, the first one that came when I bought the house was a vinyl siding. The second one was an asbestos siding. The third one is a tar shingle type siding that's there, and then under that is a clapboard siding that's there, wood clapboard. That's got about 50 million holes in it from all the sidings that were put on top of it.
Do you know anything about, I mean, the structure that's there now, correct me if I'm wrong, based upon your knowledge, is significantly larger than what was originally built. Is that correct?
I believe that this home and documentation from the first meetings that we had here show that this house was a single-family home. This house was built as a single-family home. And when you go into this home and you look through the structure, you can see the altering of the way all the joists were running, the partition walls. There's a little bit of a confusion as to the foundation, what they did there, but it was an older fieldstone type foundation, so you really can't tell where they started and finished with something like that. But this house was definitely a one-family home, 2 stories. I can't tell where the original staircase went to the second floor, but I can tell by looking at the house now, there are 2 doors on the side of the home, one to the first floor, one to the second floor, like there was an exterior staircase on the outside. Right now, there's a staircase on the inside of the house that goes from the back. It goes to the second floor, which they had to put a bedroom door in the back of the bedroom, and they had to put a side door because you can't make that turn in the hallway to get anything in the home. You have to physically go through a bedroom to get anything in the home. So it's been altered in various ways that I don't think you could possibly lay that out without adding on more footage to that structure to make it, number one, legal. And number 2, you'd have to structurally make that house sound.
You provided, as part of the application, filed numerous photos of the house. Did you take those yourself?
Yes.
Okay. And approximately when?
In this last year.
Okay. And the photos, again, I'm not gonna go through them all, but were they accurate depictions of the property at the time they were taken?
At the time I took these pictures, yes.
Okay.
I
And is
have
any-
other pictures of the
Right.
original siding and the asbestos siding. I had them from before.
Has anything changed since the photos were taken, or would you say that the photos represent the condition of the property as it
Right now, they
exists today?
represent what it consists of today, yes.
Okay. Okay, and you have just to complete this, you filed an application with the zoning board for site plan approval for the renovations that you're hoping to perform with respect to this property and the former Brantley's property at 91.
Yes,
All right, and that application's pending before the zoning board?
yes, that's
Okay.
pending, yes.
Okay. That's all I have for Mr. Gambino.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the board? Mr. Reinens, we'll start on your end.
I just have some questions about the layout of the site. Does that alleyway next to the house go along the side of the property to the back? Is that what's
Yes.
happening?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have.
I have no questions.
I have questions. You indicated you've had contractor experience.
Yes.
What would it cost to remove all the non-historic portions of that building?
I
If
would-
you'd consider it, I don't know if you've considered that.
Honestly, I haven't considered it, because, well, I haven't considered it, but I've thought about what the results would be. The original one-story family that's there, that's less than 600 square foot between the first floor and the second floor. And legally, you can't make a living space in less than 600 square feet. You would have to add on to that home in order to accomplish this.
What's the current square footage
The
of that
current
first,
square
or
footage-
the first portion of that original portion of the home?
I think it's 580 square feet
580 square feet?
between the first floor and the second floor. It's like 17 by 21 or something like that, 22. I forget the exact measurements I had.
Is the kitchen and bathroom in that original portion of the house, or is it in the add-on?
No, the kitchens and bathrooms were added on to, I guess what they called the back porch at one time. So,
And there's no bathroom in that original structure?
I think, looking at that, I believe that that house might have started out with an outhouse, or it might have started out with a cesspool that was out in the back. Because all the cast iron work that's there would not have been there at that date when that house was built.
I'm going to continue. I had a whole bunch of
Sorry.
questions. That's
Apologies.
okay. No, that's fine. Second, as to the interior, I think you said it has been gutted.
Yes.
It was gutted because there was a fire, or?
Yes, there was a fire
Okay.
on the second floor
Gutted,
kitchen.
what is left after, on the interior after it was gutted?
Well, what's left is, on each floor, a front room that has been remodeled probably 10 times since that structure was built.
Okay. So had you considered what cost it would be to return the building to its original use? You'd have to do the interior, and you'd have to do the exterior. I know you indicated you hadn't decided on the interior, but what about the interior?
I would think, like I said, I would think that you would definitely have to add to the footprint of that property in order to make a legal two-family back out of that.
You have any sense of cost?
Cost, well, if you looked at the current cost, which I probably would say you're looking at $275 a square foot, and at $275 a square foot, I could do some calculations if you want. Hang on a second. But we're looking at $467,000 with the renovations on this
I'm sorry,
house.
how much?
$467,000, which,
You're saying 400 and something?
$467,000.
Okay.
I would never put that kind of money into that property, not in its location, not where
Okay.
it's at.
I have some other questions. Your plan to demolish the building and create a parking space, will that somehow increase your business?
I think that, well, two things. I think it would alleviate a lot of the parking congestion in that neighborhood that's there
You mean on the street?
on the street.
Okay.
I think that it would make the other businesses that are there, it would be a little bit more comfortable for them, for their people to come and have parking for their, like, Mr. Jefferson has his restaurant across the street, and he operates 4 or 5 days a week there. And I think that he would appreciate the extra space that we have there. I think some of the tenants in the area would appreciate the space that they would have there. I think it would make it an easier operation for me to be able to expand into to the Brantley Tire Building. And I think by having my personnel parking off the street there, I think it would be better for them. I think it would be safer for them.
So are you saying that you would permit residential parking or neighborhood parking in the parking lot?
For my people
Yes.
and for the people there.
The people on
Your residential
your
tenants?
property?
I have 2 residential tenants on 99 Maple Avenue. I would like to see them park inside there too. I have 2 women that have been there a long time. I would like to be able to secure the gate there so that they feel more comfortable.
Currently, the residential tenants do not have parking.
They do have parking over there, they do. But there's a whole nother thing going on with a home that's on the other side, and there's all kinds of issues going on there, and they've been quite nervous about that property, about transit people. It's been vacant for over 3 years, and they're always asking me to do something better for them.
So it's fair to say it's on-site but not secured?
Yes.
Okay.
My next question, do you need the entire lot for your parking space?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, do you mind elaborating on that? How many spots do you require?
I have 7 employees in that building, and I think that we would probably take up all 7 during the course of the day, and then in the evening, the other tenants would take 2 of the spots up.
And
And on
how?
weekends, we're not there, so they would have it weekends and nights.
And currently, if we grant the total demolition, there would only be 7 spots available, or would there be additional
No,
spots
that's
available?
it.
So it could only accommodate, if we grant the total demolition, it could only accommodate 7 spaces?
Yes.
Okay.
But currently, your employees park on the street?
Yes, they
And
do.
customers do as
They park
well.
on Lexington, and they park on Maple there.
Do they find it challenging to find parking?
It's always challenging in that neighborhood. Always challenging. It's always been. There's just not enough space for the high impact of residential and commercial properties that are there.
The properties surrounding 95 Maple, are they both commercial or are they mixed use?
Both of them are commercial. Well, I should say, 99 Maple to the right of 95, that's a mixed use. That's commercial first floor, 2 residential second floor.
Okay.
The property Brantley's next to me, to the 95, that's commercial.
And, well, I think it's my final question. Are there any other lots on that block where there is no building located?
I believe not,
Meaning,
sir.
is there any you would
vacant
create an
parcels?
empty space in which there would be nothing, so parking?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. Those are my initial questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you.
I think I just had one additional question about the siding. The last layer that you mentioned, is that the original siding?
The last layer, well, you know, at first sight, I thought it was.
Mhm.
Then I started to investigate how the other additions were put on, and I compared that siding to the siding that was on the original one-family home.
Mhm.
And I realized that I think that at that time, when they did all this alteration, someone went behind and re-clapboarded that whole house. at that
So
point.
the layer currently in the front portion of the house, the original portion of the house, is the same as the 2 additions?
Is the same as the 2 additions,
2 additions,
yes.
okay. Thanks.
Just a couple quick questions. Now, do you have a proposed site plan?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And do you have any proposed alterations to 91?
Yes, I do.
Maple? Okay. Is that something that you would be open to sharing with the commission? Is this going to be just something we should consider as part of
Sure,
the
I think it's-
overall demolition? Because it's not just knocking down a property and putting a parking lot. It's
Yes.
about all 3 lots, right?
Right, I mean, you don't have any intention, if you're able to go ahead with this project, of leaving the Brantley's tire building to look
The way it is.
does
No,
today.
not at all.
Just give a rough
Yes, not
idea
at
of
all.
what you're planning.
And sorry,
to do.
procedurally also, that application, if it moves forward, will come back to the
Of course.
HBC for referral as well.
The old Brantley building, right now, as it stands, it's kind of structurally unsound.
Mhm.
There's a lot of cracks in the walls, and it needs to be completely redone. We have plans on reinforcing all the 3 walls behind it and putting a complete new set of walls in the front of the building, putting in some large glass panels in the front to display some items with a glass door. And we plan on putting the facade to match my 99 building, which is a scalloped type building that matches the neighborhood, because there's a couple other buildings in the neighborhood that have that. But as far as square footage and as far as height, as far as squareness, it's gonna be the same.
Mhm.
Just it's gonna get a full facelift though.
It might be helpful, because this sort of describes, these are the plans that have been submitted to the zoning board.
Mhm.
I mean, this is at the top is the existing building. At the bottom, you see a depiction of what the building would look like. Of course, it's not colorized or
Mhm.
anything, but you can see that it's substantially changing and improving for the look of the building, which currently does nothing for the neighborhood.
Mr. Tremblay, what's the sheet designation for those plans?
Okay, this is, what I was referring to is a plan prepared by John Guadagnoli. It's sheet A1 of the 2-page exhibit that's been submitted to the zoning board in support of the pending application.
So, Tommy, we can mark that as an exhibit, and since we already have it on file, there's no need to, formally submit it. You had a question on that?
Not on that.
Okay. And I take it, because you are going in for site plan application, there will be a formal consolidation of those multiple lots, so it's one
Yes. That's the
cohesive
plan.
unit. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Sorry, Vice Chair, I had one additional question. This might actually be more for Tommy and Mr. Burr. So I'm assuming one of the requirements of the statute is that the applicant make a good faith attempt to sell. Apparently, it's not applicable. I'm assuming the answer is no, but have you made an attempt to sell the property?
No.
And I just wanted to clarify why it is not applicable to this particular application for demolition.
It's not necessarily that it's not applicable, it's that they've requested a waiver from that requirement as part of this application.
So a waiver was requested, so it's not that it's not applicable, so we would have to waive that requirement.
Right.
I see.
don't think
Well-
that's a requirement in order to appear before this board asking to demolish the building. The issue before the board is whether this structure is appropriate for total demolition based upon the criteria.
Right,
The
but-
criteria for demolition don't,
Well, one of the criteria of the statute is that the applicant shall make a good faith attempt to sell the property as is to somebody who would want to attempt to restore it, if I'm not mistaken. I think that I'm paraphrasing probably poorly.
Yeah, that's a procedural requirement
Yeah.
to submit the application, but I think it's based on if they're making the argument that there's no feasible alternative but demolition. And here I think they're making the argument that on the merits, they should get the demolition, but, I think what, Mr.
I think
Gambino
that's a-
testified is it could be restored, it's just
So
not
why would, we
financially
should probably have
feasible.
a sidebar about this, because I don't understand why any applicant would ever make the submission that there's no feasible alternative, because they could always circumvent the need to make a good faith attempt to sell. So I'm very confused about that. why that would alleviate the need to follow that procedural step. But I'm willing to table that for another day.
Yeah, if they forego that argument, that there's no other practical alternative, it just means there's a heightened standard when they go through the other criteria.
So there's a heightened standard.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
I did want to ask a question on the follow-up of that. Again, it's directed at the witness. You're a contractor. Do you have any reason to believe people will be willing to buy that structure?
None
and,
whatsoever, sir.
And restore it to its historic character?
If there was visible historic characteristics to that property, other than there's an A-frame and it's a little tiny home, there is nothing there. There's no gables, there's no dental molding, there's nothing there that makes me believe that there's something that someone's gonna say, great, let me spend thousands of dollars to have this house lifted, trail it away, moved, cut all these lines down from the street to go to another property. I can't imagine who would do that.
Thank you.
And, I know, I respect what everyone's saying, but all due respect to that, you know, our obligation is greater than just one application. And, you know, my concern is that you don't know until you put it on the marketplace if somebody would want to purchase it and restore it. So I think that's probably the reason for that statutory requirement. But again, I'm willing to table that discussion. But I think that's something we should revisit as a board.
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
Because I don't know where that is in this ordinance. It's in the.
Total demolition ordinance, right?
I don't know where that's set forth in the total demolition ordinance. It's set
Yeah.
forth in the HPC or, you know.
Well, I don't have
I know.
the ordinance in front of me, Mr. Tremblay, but I know that we have, in previous applications, that was one of the issues that we had to debate on this board. The applicant had not made a good faith effort, and it was one of the, it was a sticking point for a lot of people for why they voted the way they voted. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about the requirements of this ordinance. I want to make sure that moving forward for future applicants, that we're doing the right thing as respect to making good faith attempts to sell.
Understood, and I just want
Yeah.
to make clear, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I don't see anywhere in the total demolition ordinance where it spells out any obligation on the part of the owner to try to sell the property.
Yeah, it's in the procedural requirements of the
It is in
contents of the
there.
application. It's section 347-142.12C, and it says, in any instance where there is a claim of no other alternative relief to total demolition, the applicant shall provide written documentation of good faith attempts to sell the building,
And
blah,
it's
blah,
shall.
blah.
Yeah.
And we're
But-
not making the
yep,
claim that there's
exactly.
no, you know,
Mhm.
obviously,
Again, but you see my issue with that as well. Any applicant should now therefore not make the claim that there's no other alternative, right?
Yeah.
So, again, I think that's perhaps something that we need to revisit as a board.
And it's something we should talk
Yeah,
about
yes.
as we're doing the recommendations.
But I understand now that it may not be applicable to this particular application, so.
okay.
Mr. Connolly, did you have any questions for the witness?
No questions
No,
at
all
this
right.
time.
I'll go ahead and open, you have a follow-up? I'll go ahead and open it up to the public just on questions for this witness. Sir, can you state your name and address for the record?
David Cummings, 8. I should know how to do this. David Cummings, 8 Pleasant Avenue, Montclair, New Jersey. I'm here today also as 4th Ward Counselor. The main issue I really see is whether the house is deemed historic. That's one. But a concern of mine is regard to the property, particularly Grantley's. First of all, the house was a single family. The Mitchell family lived there back in the 60s and 70s. But what I will ask is, Brantley's, before it was a tire shop, was a garage. So has there been any remediation of the land?
What I've done on that property, when I purchased that property, I had the entire property scanned, radar, both properties. And there is no tanks on that property whatsoever. So whatever has happened to the past.
Yeah, because my concern is what we have going on with 399 Orange Road, which in the past was a garage, and we're still trying to get that taken care of. So I think that's something that's very important.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
If you don't mind? Mr. Murphy owned that property, and I had the honors of speaking with Mr. Murphy before he sold me this property as to what, he had the property as an auto shop. And he
Right.
explained to me that his business was strictly a business where he would do tune-ups, some tire changes, and, you know, nothing severe to the point, because he had no lifts in that shop whatsoever. And if you've ever been in Brantley, you'll never see the ground.
Yeah.
Butchie's. There was never any lifts in that property. And even with Butchie that was in there in Brantley's place, there was no lift step inside
Never.
there. He stored all the tires in there.
Right.
And you know, Butchie did all his work outside on the street.
Well, not everything, but
Well.
my point is, I think an environmental study should definitely be required to assess the soil samples around this property, particularly considering it backs up to homes on Wheeler Street. And I think that's something that should definitely be taken into consideration. I'm just asking questions. The other question I have in terms of conversation about the residential neighborhood is essentially where this is located. It is a residential neighborhood. There are a couple of businesses, and what you're proposing to do with Brantley's, and one in terms of making it, you know, a showroom, so to speak, you know, adds to it becoming more of a commercial use. So that's the other thing, a commercial area. It's not. One of the things I would have liked to have heard is by demolition and potentially parking, that area is in need of parking for some of the residents. And if there's any way, again, I'm saying that you were to demolish, I think the residents there would love the opportunity to have a place to park in the evening, particularly over weekends, because right now they have no place to park. Or those who live in the apartments there don't have many places to park on that street. Trust me, I hear it from overnight parking requests consistently as a council person. And then for me personally, at a time when we talk about affordable housing, this is located in an area, if there is something affordable in Montclair, this would be it. So the point of, you know, offering up to sale, I think is something that we should take a serious look at. That's just me speaking, as a resident and someone who grew up in the area right around the corner on Mission Street, and like I said, know a little bit of history of the house that you're talking about, the residents who live there. And finally, what I will ask is that when you look at tearing down something, this commission, can you please show me another location in Montclair, or how many that we've torn down, totally demolished, that were historic? I know we went through at Union Street, but I'm just asking that should also be something that should be considered, because once you start down the road, you're opening up some floodgates. And so I'd just like to know, as a counselor, how many addresses, locations we've torn down and demolished for this purpose. Thank you. And I appreciate all of you for your work that you're doing. I know it's like sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other further questions for this witness? If not, I'll go ahead and close this portion of the proceeding. Mr. Trembulac, if you'd like to call your next witness.
Yes, my next witness is Gregory Dietrich. Maybe you can, you want to sit?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can sit. Okay. Swear?
Yep. Go ahead and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you'll give this commission will be truthful and accurate to the best of your ability?
I do.
Okay. And if you could, Mr. Trembulac, just provide some background and educational experience for this witness.
That was my first question. Yeah, Mr. Dietrich, can you start off by providing the board with a summary of your educational background and your professional qualifications?
Sure. So Gregory Dietrich Preservation Consulting. I'm a graduate of Columbia's Historic Preservation and Real Estate Development programs. Prior to launching my own consulting practice, I worked for a cultural resource management firm that was based in New Jersey between 2002 and 2009, where I was tasked with surveying myriad historic properties in various parts of the state, largely suburban areas. And since that time, since launching my own consulting practice in 2009, I've been doing National Register nominations of historic districts. I've been doing historic tax credit applications, writing grants, and also doing historic building and landscape analyses as well. Okay. In addition, I am, in terms of my qualifications exceed the federal guidelines for architectural historians. In addition, I am a part-time adjunct instructor at NYU in its Art History, Urban Design, and Architecture Studies program, where I teach a seminar to undergrads on historic preservation. And in terms of my testimony experience, I have testified before the Jersey City Historic Preservation Commission, the Evesham Township Historic Preservation Commission, and being based in New York, regularly before the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission as well. I'm also a historical consultant to the Borough of Rockledge in Bergen County, which I've been doing for 17 years. And I'm also had been a historical consultant to the Borough of Westwood, also in Bergen County, for 10 years.
And your
Just there for lunch.
your private company, Gregory Dietrich Preservation Consulting, you've had that since 2009?
Correct.
All right, and the focus of that business is entirely on historic preservation?
Yes. it is.
Consulting work?
Yes.
Okay.
When people ask me what I do, I say I deal in significance because I'm constantly tasked with doing the research, analysis, survey, and evaluation of significance.
And you gave me tonight a written curriculum vitae or summary of your qualifications. Can I have this marked as an exhibit and give it to the board? And I would ask that Mr. Dietrich's qualifications be accepted as an expert in the field of historic preservation.
Any questions from the board on this witness's qualifications? All right, absent any objection, Mr. Dietrich, you're duly qualified as an expert in historic preservation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dietrich, were you retained by the applicant to provide a report in connection with this application?
Yes, I was.
What specifically were you asked to do?
I was asked to review the township's consultant's report, the application, the memorandums that were also drafted in response to the application, which also then took me into the research of the actual report that got us to this day today. And to then look at the demolition criteria and to see whether or not I could respond affirmatively to this request for demolition.
So are you familiar then with the ordinance that that brings us before the board tonight? The
yes.
demolition ordinance? Okay. And did you have an opportunity to inspect the property also?
Yes, I did. On June 1st, I inspected the exterior of the property.
Okay. All right, and you prepared a written report in the form of a letter to me dated June 7th, 2022, correct?
Correct.
Okay, the board has a copy of that report. I guess it doesn't need to be marked as an exhibit, I assume. Okay. All right, so Mr. Dietrich, if you could begin by discussing the first section of your report in which you provide a response to Mr. Connolly's report. Then you review that portion of your report and just discuss your findings and conclusions.
Certainly. So after reviewing the application for total demolition the Montclair Code with respect to the demolition of historic resources structures, Connolly and Hickey historical architects, and Tommy Sibilia's memorandums regarding the application, and the relevant sections of Connolly and Hickey's intensive level architectural survey for Montclair, Wheeler Street and Oakcroft residential areas. I also looked at some of the primary sources because I just wanted to double check those sources that inform the survey findings and the survey narrative. I came to the conclusion that this is a property that lacks the requisite integrity of design, materials, and workmanship to convey any potential for historical and/or cultural significance. Further, I also came to the conclusion that it doesn't meet the historical and/or cultural significance as had been indicated in the proposed Wheeler Street Historic District. And namely, this had to do with the family, the Ucci family, the Italian immigrant family, because the significance statement for the larger district talked about multiple generations of one family residing in a particular residence, putting down their roots in Montclair, the idea that many of these building types reflect a moderate to high density that was addressing the needs of these families that were taking in boarders as part of their ability to save up for homes and then eventually purchase homes. So ultimately, what I learned from the discussion of the family was that they appeared very early in 1900 in the neighborhood, not at this address, on a street that doesn't exist anymore. And then they show up in the local directory in 1910 at this address. However, then in 1915, we understand that there's a house there, and they own that house through the tax records. So essentially, 1915, we know that house is there. That was the construction date that was attributed to the house in the survey. And then we understand that in 1918, the family had moved to Verona. And we know that from his World War I draft registration card, the father. There were not multiple generations of this family, to my knowledge, living in this property. It was essentially the father, the wife, and the 4 daughters. So I think ultimately the idea of sort of hanging this hat on the significance of this Italian family that had really put down roots in this, at this particular address, which is the subject of the application, was not consistent, really, with what we know about the property. And in fact, certainly if more research uncovered something that gave more of a conclusive idea that actually, no, they were there longer, this house was there longer, but based on what we know of this house, it doesn't meet that criteria. But to me, because I know how seriously the State Historic Preservation Office takes this idea of integrity, they're adhering to federal guidelines, this idea of integrity of location, design, setting, feeling, workmanship, and association. It matters, because without that ability of a property deed to convey the significance, if there is in fact significance, then you don't really have a there in terms of preservation. And so that really is sort of my takeaway. I have to say that the consultant did make a determination of non-contributing for this property when doing the survey based on the extent of the additions. However, I would also add that the extent of replacement materials have also compromised its ability to convey this, I would say, proposed significance.
In talking about that last point, there's a comment in Mr. Connolly's report suggesting that the alterations and the changes that have occurred to this structure over the years are reversible, and that someone could remove the additions and put it back to what it looked like 100 years ago. What's your comment? Do you have a comment regarding that
Yeah,
statement?
I mean, essentially, when a property is designated, it is designated in the here and now. It is what you see today. It is not some conjecture of what it can be in the future, as noble as that is, certainly from a preservation ethic. But that is not how properties are surveyed. They are surveyed as to, when you visit the property today, is it able to convey those 7 aspects of integrity? And the federal guidelines, even the state acknowledges that not all 7 have to be there, but there does have to be an overwhelming ability of a property to read as historic that is not substantiated when one visits this site today. I also just wanted to touch on one of your questions about, the potential for restoration and all. I think the owner was pretty clear about that there was some sort of alteration of that original wood clapboard, probably to tie in all these multiple additions over time at some point in time. But that being said, it's also now been covered up several times over, and people don't do that unless there's some serious problems going on. So I just wanted to put that out there, that it usually suggests that there's something deeper going on with the original siding, that they need to do this.
But you agree that the property in its current condition is non-contributing?
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
But theoretically, at least, one could do what Mr. Connolly suggested and remove a good portion of the building and change what's been altered over the last century and put it back to what it looked like in 1915 or so. That's theoretically possible.
Sure, it would be a conjecture, because of course we don't know what that looks like. And certainly hearing the applicant describe the interior, one sort of does wonder exactly how did that building actually function, and what was the original program in this very sort of smaller space.
Okay, and in order for that to happen, while it's theoretically possible, it would have to be, correct me if I'm wrong, it would have to be something that would be done voluntarily by the owner of the property. Is that right?
Yes, and that is another important point, I think, and that is that even properties that are designated, owners of those properties are not, through the process of designation, required to restore their properties, right? I mean, the building, as I said, is designated as it is at the time of designation. It is not designated as some conjecture of future restoration. Granted, a municipality a historic preservation commission would encourage that, but that's not a requirement. I mean, I think, just because of the tension with property owner rights and all in the country, I think you'd probably have a revolution on your hands if, that was part of preservation, where once we designate it, you have to return it to, some.
Well, okay, so if this application were to be denied, that would not necessarily result in this property being preserved or restored, right?
Absolutely.
That would be up to the property owner.
Absolutely not.
So, I mean, theoretically then, someone could just put aluminum siding on this building as it exists today, whether it be Mr. Gambino or a future owner, and
Yeah, I would put it to this commission, whether there is something that comes into play beyond the demolition criteria that would affect the alteration of this particular house, not being designated as part of a historic district.
okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Mr. Connolly's, any anything else you wanted to respond to in his report? You talked about the Ucci family. By the way, do you know
Yeah.
anything about Pasquale Ucci? Is he a person of any notoriety or significance?
Not to my knowledge, but I will say that I mean, I thought that it was a very interesting theme, that I guess ultimately what one would want to see is there to be some sort of character-defining features to these Italian immigrant laborers' homes, that would be something that then we can say, yes, because we can see that these homes consistently have this sort of feature or something. I think it's very interesting that many of these laborers were working on the big houses up on the hill and, you know, doing the work on those houses. And it certainly seems to me like therein lies the significance in terms of their work in building Montclair that is then realized in these, you know, pretty impressive larger homes. But in terms of just, you know, working class housing, there has to be something that is going on there, and didn't really find it in this particular property.
Okay. I guess one final question I have regarding Mr. Connolly's report. He makes, and I just want your reaction to this or your response to his comment that, quote, the owner should consider restoration of the front original core of the house, remove the additions, reserve the remainder of the property for parking. Such an approach would not prevent the applicant's intent to occupy much of the property for parking, and the house would serve as a buffer for this parking where no off-street parking is prevalent in the streetscape.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that a desire to preserve is not a mandate to preserve. It really does come back to why would one treat something so precious that has been determined as a non-contributing resource. It doesn't jive. I, as a consultant and as an architectural historian, really appreciate the idea of parameters in my work. That is, that I have a set of criteria that I have to look at, and I have to see whether or not a particular property measures up. And if it doesn't measure up, that's okay. I mean, that means that there can be some sort of accommodation. But I think it feels a little whack-a-mole if in fact you're saying one thing about the property and then another thing about the need for its preservation, if in fact the original determination is that this does not contribute to the significance of the district.
Okay. All right. Then what I'd like to do is move on to the second part of your report where you provided your analysis and your opinion with regard to the criteria for total demolition that are listed in the ordinance. And I thank Tommy for giving me a concise summary of those criteria in his report. And I'd like to just go through, I think there are 10 of them, and provide your response, because these are the criteria that govern this commission's determination of this application. So let's take them one at a time. The first criteria is the structure's, quote, historical, architectural, cultural, and aesthetic significance.
Okay. And excuse me, but I am actually going to just read from my report because I don't want to leave anything out. The claims about the historical and cultural significance of the Ucci family residing at 95 Maple Avenue are not substantiated by the information uncovered, which indicates that, well, for one, they most likely lived in the house that stands there today for 3 years or less before moving out of Montclair, thereby belying the notion of putting down roots in the community. Well, two, the building was constructed as a single-family dwelling, belying the notion that it contributed to the moderate to high density of housing stock that was a character-defining feature of the Wheeler Street area. And then the third, only the immediate family of Ucci's lived at 95 Maple Avenue, belying the notion that multiple generations of the family inhabited the house during the period of significance, and/or took in borders from the south or elsewhere. And then otherwise, no claim has been made suggesting that the house or garage possesses architectural and/or aesthetic significance.
So, Mr. Dietrich, you're referring to section B 3 of your report, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Section B 3A was the first response there.
And in terms of your representations to each of the criteria in our ordinance, I think we could accept what's in the report if there's anything you want to add. So just so, I know you have concerns about
Understood.
leaving something
Yeah.
out,
Sure.
but
Okay,
if you just want to highlight it.
You would
and-
just feel like you were reading along.
Yeah,
I understand.
I'm looking over, I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
no, it's, if there's something you want to highlight or add or clarify, but I think we'll accept what you represented in your report, and that'll be fully incorporated into the record.
Okay. Yeah, I would just like to conclude by just saying that, I do believe that Connolly and Hickey's determination in the survey was correct as a non-contributing resource, owing to those hosts of unsympathetic alterations that included the rear additions, but also was compounded by this plethora of replacement materials, including the metal paneled entry door, the vinyl sided walls, the vinyl sash windows, the vinyl covered cornice and trim, which really only bolsters the consultant's original determination. Taken together with its garage, which is covered in vinyl siding with metal paneled garage doors, the property does not meet the requisite integrity that would merit preservation. And then again, just that the claims about the historical and/or cultural significance of the Ucci family residing there and their contribution to the Italian immigrant significance of Wheeler Street were just not substantiated by the information uncovered, further affirming the property's role as a non-contributing resource. And I ultimately don't believe that retaining this property would satisfy the township or the consultant's objectives to preserve Montclair's historic resources. Instead, I think it would perpetuate an assumption that preservation is arbitrary and not objective, and that in doing so really undermine the larger purpose of protecting truly significant properties that are capable of conveying their historical, architectural, and/or cultural significance through these surviving elements.
Is there anything in your opinion regarding the current condition of this property that that provides anything significant in terms of architecture or, historic character? Is there any in its current condition?
No, not in its current condition.
In your opinion, does the existing structure contribute in a positive way to the character, ambiance, and stability of the neighborhood or the Montclair community?
No, it does not.
In your opinion, would demolition of this structure have any negative impact on the ambiance or the environment of this neighborhood?
No, I don't think it would.
And would removal of this building have any impact on the historic context or character of the township of Montclair?
No, I don't believe it would.
And is that basically because it's already been determined to be non-contributing, meaning it has no real value?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to the survey
Right.
and review of the information really sort of brought me to this finding.
Okay. All right, that's all I have.
Thank you. I'll open up to questions from the commissioners.
I guess you have to start with Alan's first statement. Why is it even here, perhaps? I look at the definition of historic structure in our little demolition ordinance, and I don't see how it falls. It's not contributory.
Is the mic on, John?
Yeah, I think it's on. But just questions at this point,
mic
not
is on.
comments.
More questions?
More questions, just questions for the witness.
For the witness, no, I thought he did a very good job.
Yeah. Okay. Steve?
No questions.
Jerry?
criteria, whether it's historical, architectural, cultural, or aesthetic significance.
Mike?
Excuse me, let me say that all over again.
Sure.
The first criteria is its historical, architectural, cultural, and aesthetic significance. You've indicated that you should look at the now. What it looks like now, is your indication based on the now that it has no significance whatsoever?
That's correct, that it is not able to convey any potential for historical, architectural, and/or cultural significance.
Second, do you view it as irrelevant, what may be underneath whatever is covered on the outside? And second, does it have any relevance what the cost would be to restore it to whatever the hypothetical or speculative historic or cultural or other significance it had?
Yeah, I believe it is irrelevant as a non-contributing resource in a non-designated district. I don't believe that there's really sort of a role here in advocating for the preservation of something that has already been determined as not contributing to the significance of the area.
Thank you.
Mr. Graham?
So I found it interesting that Mr. Ucci was a World War I veteran and that he likely worked on building the township of Montclair. Is there any indication who lived in the home after him?
No, I did, my review was of the intensive level survey and the write-up there, so I don't know.
So we know based on his World War I record that he moved. We don't know necessarily if another family member or stayed there, correct? Do we know, Tom?
Well, the reason why we included that bit of history on Mr. Ucci, we did find it interesting and unique the way the neighborhood evolved. Italian immigrants moved in pretty quickly, and then they moved out when African Americans came up from the South. So we thought that whole history was important.
What period did that transition take place where the Italian immigrants moved out and the African American community moved in?
1920s, earlier.
1920s, okay. And we don't know, based on the records, the individuals who moved in after Mr. Ucci moved out?
Not off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I'm sure we can figure that out.
Okay. And then I have a question about, one of my concerns is that we are leaving, if we were to approve demolition, a large gap in the block that doesn't currently exist anywhere else really on that stretch. Is there any significance to the neighborhood? Does that affect the integrity of the neighborhood, leaving a gap like that on this street?
If in fact there was a case of a contributing resource that contributed to the street wall of the neighborhood, I would say yes.
So you're saying because it's non-contributing?
So,
But also there is a gap currently between the house and the tire.
Sure, but it's more of a
factory.
driveway, right? It's not as significant
It's-
as an entire lot, right? So, and I'm not sure, having, looked up there, you have the park and all, everything, I'm
Sure.
not really sure that I recall seeing anywhere else where there would be such a significant gap in terms of an entire lot being used for parking or being vacant. So the suggestion, though, is simply because it's not contributory as a building itself, it's your contention that it
Right.
doesn't impact the character of the neighborhood as a whole to remove it?
Well, I mean, maybe I'm in dangerous waters here, but to say that I believe that the demolition of this building would enhance the neighborhood. And I also believe perhaps through the planning board process, that if there was maybe some suggestions about landscaping that they'd like to see, that would sort of buffer what you're talking about. Perhaps that could be some sort of.
Sure, I think there's some kind of screening
Yeah.
would be helpful. I
Yeah.
agree with that.
But I also do want to say
Yeah.
that when you do visit that property, those two bookended commercial / mixed-use buildings are actually quite cohesive unto themselves. And this one is kind of, and I'm not, I don't have a problem with like a heterogeneous development of a town with various building types, but it is kind of interesting that those buildings do seem to be, there does seem to be a dialogue there.
I do wonder, though, when you do drive by it, though, if I hadn't known that it was up for demolition, perhaps, I would not have been as acutely aware of what it would have looked like absent that building. To me, it formed in my mind a hole there. But okay, I understand what you're saying. You're saying the two buildings, though, do create a cohesive
Yeah, exactly what I'm saying.
structure.
Yes.
Two structures.
Yeah.
I got to think about. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
I guess ultimately that it seems to me that there actually could be some sort of feeling that is, it's not necessarily a preservation thing, but that there is an architectural cohesion between those two buildings that may be enhanced with respect to this proposal.
I see that. I think the severity of the space between them, though, is what's sticking in my mind. But
I understand.
So the survey did state that the continued loss of these structures would have a negative impact on the district. And it's not just this building, but the district as a whole.
the district as a whole, right?
So it could be any building in the district would
Yeah.
have a negative impact on the district.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Dietrich,
I
you-
wanted to add a follow-up question on this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to stay on this point. You've been to the site, correct?
Yes.
What's directly across the street?
Houses. There are they look like single-family dwellings. They've
Mhm.
got porches,
There's-
gable front, I believe.
Jefferson Cafe is there as well. So you've got a residential and a commercial property next to each other. What are the setbacks look like across the street? Do you recall?
I think they're pretty immediate across the
Mhm.
street. It
Mhm.
seems more uniform
Mhm.
there, yeah.
Okay.
And more of an architectural cohesion, too,
Mhm.
with respect to those.
That's all I had. Jerry, you wanted to follow up?
Yes, you'd indicated that a removal of the building would enhance the neighborhood. I think that's the way you described it. I want to ask you a variant on that. Would leaving the building the same as it is now, would that be a negative to the neighborhood?
I believe so.
Leaving it as
Leaving it
is.
abandoned?
Yes,
Would that be a
understand.
negative to the neighborhood?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Mr. Connolly, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Any members of the public wish to ask any questions of this witness? And again, questions only of the witness?
Do I need to address myself again?
We'll just let the record reflect that
Okay.
it's Mr. Cummins again.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I want to follow up on your point of the enhancement or significance of the area. So are you saying that not having a one-family, potential two-family there would not enhance that area?
So the building is a two-family, from what I understand currently. Originally a single-family dwelling. The recommendation from the consultant was to remove the later additions, return it to the single-family, which I understand is 580 square feet.
Well, my question
Yes.
is, if it was a home where someone could live,
Yeah.
would that that wouldn't enhance the area? Because all the
Well,
other
understand
homes,
what-
all the other houses, it's a bunch of houses, a residential area.
Right, right. And what I'm saying as the historical consultant who is looking at the question of historic preservation, no, it would not enhance to retain that house.
Do you consider having a place to live a resource?
Again, I'm a historic preservation consultant. I'm not a planning expert.
But you said you didn't consider that location as is right now as a positive resource.
Correct.
So my question is, do you consider having a place to live as a resource? Because it's a residential area.
Well, I don't understand why you're asking that question.
Because historically,
Yeah.
to the point asked before, this area has a strong tradition of historic significance, not only Italian-American, but African-American and Caribbeans
Yep.
coming here in 1920s
Yes.
and living there. And so when we...
Well, not in this property, to our knowledge. We
Well,
don't know.
Mr. Mitchell, who lived there in the 60s and started a very prominent football program in Montclair
Yes.
at Glenfield Park right there,
Right.
lived there for quite some time. Yearwood Taxi, which was one of the first African-American businesses in Montclair, was housed in the garage that you're talking about behind the property. So there is a historic significance to the community there that I think happens when you really don't understand the area.
So, and my point is that even given what you are saying with respect to those associations, the property, when you visit it today, which is
Correct.
what we can only do, and look at it, it is unable to convey the significance of those owners/tenants at the time they were there. So that you have no understanding of that association.
Right, and so I go back to my question.
Yeah.
If the property was restored to where someone could live there, irregardless of the past, would it be a significant contribution to the area? A resource, an enhancement?
It would be a resource if it was restored as it originally was. I believe the period of significance is in the early 1900s.
Right.
And understanding what that would have looked like.
It would be.
Right, and as I'm
Okay.
saying, there's nothing in your ordinance that says that
Other
is a
than,
mandate.
other than what was presented earlier, that, was there any thought of potentially selling the property to someone else? Which is separate of questioning for you. In terms of the setbacks that asked, across the street is a house on Lexington Avenue, and then there's Mr. Jefferson's, so there's not a very large setback, but going down the street. And then my other question, which I don't know if I can really access, is do we know the age of the Brantley property and whether or not that will end up coming, especially since you're talking about combining the two?
Well, that building is proposed to be maintained and renovated and cleaned up and made
Okay.
much more attractive, but it's
Keep it,
not-
it would be more or less keeping it as it is. So,
Yes.
so on that property, you're going to do your best to maintain its historic, if it is in fact deemed, remain its character. It's just a house apart that you're going to, the character really is going to go away.
Counselor, I know you didn't see this when I mentioned it.
No,
before,
I saw it.
But this is what's proposed for that
Yeah.
building. It's gonna, same size, it's just gonna have a nice, clean.
No, my
storefront
point is,
and-
yeah, so that part,
Yes.
that building,
Will
which
stay.
will remain the same, so you're gonna honor its historical significance in
Well,
terms of like, you're gonna honor what is there now and upgrade it, whereas across the parking lot, you're gonna tear it down. But,
Well-
so, I get what you're saying, Alan.
Respectfully, we don't think either building has any historic significance worthy of
Well, I will.
preserving, but that's the issue for this board to decide.
Well, I would say that respectfully, the Brantley Tire Shop, the Yearwood Taxi, the Greens Garage were all significant and had a significant historical impact on the African-American community in Montclair. So I want to make sure it's straight on that. What I will then finally conclude with is, again, that property in the back was a taxi service where cars were there. So I repeat, I'll go back, and this is council work, to make sure that remediation of soil is taken before anything is done there. So I thank you for your time and your report.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to ask this witness questions regarding his testimony? Seeing none, I'll close this portion and open the floor to public comments generally about this application. Now's the time if you have any general comments in support or opposition to this application to address the commission. Seeing none, I'll close that portion and open it up to comments and deliberation from the commission on this application. And before I do, I just want to preface this with respect to Tommy's planning memorandum, where he outlines the factors that this commission needs to consider in whether we grant or deny the application, and it's set forth on page 4 of the memo, items A through J. I think we're all generally familiar with them, and there's been a lot of discussion on how it's applied, and our understanding is it's really a balancing test. We need to go through each of these factors. Not one single factor is dispositive, but we need to weigh them all in relation to the testimony and evidence that was proffered in this by the witnesses and the applicant. And just for me, looking through the criteria, I found Mr. Dietrich's testimony very credible with respect to historical significance of the site and impacts to the surrounding area. It's my opinion that looking at the Wheeler Street survey and nomination report, which is essentially all that this commission could go on since there was no designation. We haven't had any additional information with respect to the subsequent history of the property. And again, that would be something that could be within the council's purview to designate individual sites despite this. The designation of the neighborhood ultimately being abandoned. So to the extent that there are sites within Wheeler Street that do have significant history, especially among the African American community that came after the 1910 to 20 period of significance, that's something that the town, this commission, and the council should explore for future designations. But at this stage, I think we are limited to what's in that report. And what I find significant is that 99 Maple is designated as a contributing building, whereas 95 was non-contributing / harmonizing altered, and 91 Maple is designated as a non-contributing intrusion. So to the extent that this property is being unified and repurposed so that these two non-contributing properties are subordinate to and support a contributing historic structure, I think would be a benefit to the community, especially given the fact that it's serving a long-standing business in the area. Normally I'm not too thrilled about removing housing for parking, especially this close to transit, but considering the fact that the multifamily house is not habitable at this point and is not likely to be habitable given the significant constraints with rehabilitation and the fact that restoration to its historic character would eliminate a residential dwelling unit and would leave a single-family home that might be non-compliant to current standards. I think that militates against preserving it in lieu of parking that would serve a mixed use property. with, you know, the potential for adaptive reuse that would be consistent with that transit-oriented development down the line. You know, having that larger lot and the potential to further redevelop consistent with the existing historic architecture. I think that could be an overall benefit for the neighborhood as well as for the township and its housing needs. So that's where I kind of stand on this application. I'd like to open it up for further comments and deliberation by the members.
I did have a question. We were going to hear from Tom on his report first, because I did have some questions for you.
Oh, yeah, if you
Conway.
want to ask Tom.
Yes, the standard is historical, architectural, cultural, and aesthetic significance. Did you conclude that it had no architectural or aesthetic significance? I'm sorry, Tom.
We did say that it appears to lack architectural integrity, but its history and context may deem it worthy of preservation, at least in part. The building does retain, at least the front section without the addition, still retains its original scale, its size, its fenestration patterns. Some of the, you know, trim and siding may not be there, but it still does look, you know, pretty much the same
Let me ask.
in relation to size and scale and fenestration.
I should have been more direct in my.
Yeah, the porch was
my question.
enclosed.
The question is, did you find, was your finding principally based on its cultural significance or on its architectural significance?
Cultural.
Okay, so it's not based on historic, architectural, or aesthetic significance?
Not necessarily.
Okay, that's strictly based on cultural in that the building, in its pre-existing condition, not its current condition, had some representative of a cultural history in Montclair.
Yes, and it still retains the same use. It's a residence, right? We're not changing its use to some other type of building. It works within the broader district.
Second, as to a cultural significance, what are the criteria that you normally use for designating a property as culturally significant?
Well, there are different criteria that we have to look at. If it's architecturally, cultural, I'm not following the question.
No, you'd indicated that the building had cultural significance because of who lived there.
That's right, in the context of Montclair and the neighborhood.
Context of Montclair. So what I was asking is, what do you normally use your criteria for determining whether something is culturally significant?
Well, we felt that it was unique the way the immigrant population came and went so quickly in the neighborhood. That was something that was unique.
On that particular street or that particular block?
In the district.
In the district. Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions I had of, actually, there's one other one. You had indicated as a proposal that they consider, hold on, I have to get the right report here, that they consider restoration of the front original core of the house, remove the additions, and reserve the remainder of the property for parking. Did you have a sense of what that might cost them to do that?
No, I do not.
Okay. Do you know what's actually under the current siding?
Do not.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for Tom.
I'm done my questions of Tom.
Okay. One of the things that they're hanging their hat on here is the non-contributory language of that report, of the Wheeler Street area. But then, Tom, you go ahead and say that it does add to the neighborhood and so on. So how do you
deal with both those statements?
I believe we said it was non-contributing in its existing state if those older additions were removed, the front section could be restored, and which, you know, may change.
But the report originally said non-contributory.
That's right.
This is,
Right.
that statement is after the fact, right?
Yeah, that's.
I mean, I don't disagree with the general, you know, it's a house. It's a
Right.
residential neighborhood. It just seems difficult to replace it with a parking lot. But, you know, I go and I look at the definition of historic structure in the beginning of this demolition ordinance. Maybe this is where we need to work on it a little bit, but it doesn't seem to fall at all as a historic. I don't even know if everything falls from that. All those, you know, things about what it is or how it is, whatever, starts with that first definition, and it doesn't seem to that's, you know, those are my thoughts. Not that it wouldn't be better in a different way, but that's not what the ordinance says, in my mind.
Steve, any comments?
You know, the original comment is the materials that it's made of, it's all original wood, probably ancient trees and stuff like that. That would be hard to lose. The shape of the original building, it's not built anymore, probably was significant, but is it representative of what was built at the time? We don't know anything about that. I never liked the idea of tearing down a structure for a parking lot, but I can understand why you want a parking lot. So, and you've got these bookends, might be better for a future development.
My overall comments, I believe they've satisfied all the criteria for issuance of the permit to have it torn down. I'm only uncomfortable with that same notion of creating a vacant space, removing a building without leaving some, either trees or a historic front or some element. That's the only thing I'm uncomfortable, but I believe you have to look at the building as it exists, and I think that's important. A lot of what we talked about, I think, is speculation as to what exists underneath. Now maybe there was pictures, but I didn't see it, of what it looked like in 1915 or then or about when it was built. But right now, I think it's pure speculation. We have a building that's vacant. It's in poor condition, interior and exterior. It's so modified it has no relationship to the historical architecture. The only thing it preserves maybe is the sense of culture that someone lived in there that was of the category of an immigrant or otherwise. And I think when we do it based on culture, we have to have a more solid evidence in history of this being really significant relative to that cultural history. I don't think we have any of it. In other words, I looked down through everything and I believe there's a benefit to removing it. It's a unsightly a building that's non-functional and couldn't be made functional without substantial cost. I don't think you could, we don't have information from our consultant as what it would cost to remove all the exterior and make, still have a functional building. So therefore, I think the permit should be issued. I do think we really want the applicant to consider what can be done to avoid the appearance of a empty space, and maybe that's some other means of preserving
Well,
history, whether it's.
Would they come back?
Fortunately,
Landscaping, trees, or
they've got
otherwise.
a site plan application, so it's gonna come back
Back to
for
us.
us. It'll go to the planning board, and I think those considerations, with respect to, aesthetics of the new development, mitigating that open space gap, and even considerations regarding, remediation and site work. I think that's kind of outside of our purview for a demolition permit, but it's something that can be, raised during the planning board hearing. Mr. Graham?
My number one concern, as I mentioned earlier, was the fact that we will be creating a large gap between those two buildings that doesn't seem to exist anywhere else on the street. I think that could potentially impact the neighborhood. I also thought the counselor gave some pretty compelling history to who lived in this area, in addition to the Uchi family. But I think if we're balancing issues, weighing the cost-benefit of keeping or demolishing, I think John made an excellent point that, really it does stem from our purview is the structure historic? Does it convey a sense of the history, as the witness had been, Mr. Dietrich had stated. And I think the cost of restoring, we saw the pictures of the interior, we see the pictures of the exterior. It is in extremely poor condition, and I think the burden to the applicant is significant if they were to need to restore it. I think this is a difficult question. I don't think this is very, it's not, a simple matter of, it's not clear to me that it has to be demolished, but I think weighing the interests, the burdens to the applicant, and the lack of architectural significance, in my mind, weighs towards granting the permit.
Thank you. That being said, I'll entertain a motion on this application.
I move to accept the permit.
I need your move to accept the permit.
Okay, is there
I'll
a second?
second it.
All right. So there is a motion to approve the demolition permit. Tommy, you want to call the roll?
Mr. Hyman?
Yes.
Mr. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Rooney?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
It's unanimously approved.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, and thank you again for scheduling this meeting tonight.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the
Good luck, and we'll see you again. That being said, it's the last item on the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion?
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.